All right, hello. Welcome to an episode of My Black is Transnational. And I have on here today our special guest, Dr. Jessica Puri, representing Northwestern University, but most importantly, representing Nigeria. Dr. Puri is a current faculty member at the Northwestern University, writer, lecturer, very passionate about issues related to health, adolescence experiences, especially gender-based violence. We'll talk a little bit about like the genital mutilations and things of that nature. But a transnational herself, born in Nigeria, immigrated here, living that life. And so she is here to talk about experience. Dr. Puri, welcome. What's going on?
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, Dr. Khalif. Do you prefer Dr. Kel? Or Dr. Kalichi? Does it feel like more official?
Dr. Kells, no, I mean professionally when I'm on these air, I mean Dr. Call me Dr. Kells, Dr. Ibe-Lamberts,
Yeah,
it don't like for the show, you my sis, it don't matter. Just
right. I like Dr. Kel. It's like official but casual.
yeah,
Like
call
it.
me Dr. Kells then, but you gotta
Yeah.
put the S in it. So it's Kells.
Yeah. Oh, Kel's got it. Okay. That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. So yeah, man. But yes, thank you again. Welcome to the show. How you doing? I normally give people an opportunity to just like introduce themselves. I give you your accolades, but I also want you to take an opportunity to introduce
Yeah.
yourself formally to the audience.
Okay. It's always interesting which direction I decide to go with introducing myself depending on the space, right? So, Dr. Puri, I go by Jess, Doc J, all of it. I am a wife, a daughter, a sister, a transnational, still figuring out my experience just with as growth is happening and identities are, taking place. But I have lived in the US since 2011. I have lived in Chicago the whole time. I fell in love with the city. So came here, did my undergrad at Loyola, master's at DePaul, doctorate at Northwestern. Clearly have no loyalties to any university. My thing is I just love Chicago. I just love the city. Every time I visit other places, I'm like, how I'm gonna go back though. Yeah, so I've absolutely loved it here. Met my husband here too. We've been married about 2.5 years, together for years. He is African American. He's from Dallas, so that is a whole other kind of experience of Blackness. Like navigate a whole other identity to navigate. Even when we talk about Blackness and as a Black woman, but also African, but him a Black man from the South. So
Mhm.
that's a little bit about myself. Oh, I guess my jobs.
I'm here. Yeah, you got the good
Yeah.
backdrop. You know, looking official. You
Notice
got the
I said jobs plural, like a good Nigerian. Yeah, I lecture at Northwestern, like you said, but I also teach at DePaul, an intro to public health course. And I'm a content writer for a mental health app that focuses on Gen Z, so everyone from ages 13 to 25. And that is really fun because I get to be an academic and a creative at the same time and, kind of merge them both in the writing space.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, you're hustling and you're representing. All
Sure.
right. So let's get into it. I think many of the people on the show kind of, understand how we go and, I always talk about like your upbringing and I talk
Mhm.
about like what that experience is like, but I want to work a little bit backwards. Right. And
Okay.
I kind of want to take it to you and the reason I'm doing that is because you did something that I think most people that I interview naturally don't do, which is you said, I'm a wife. I'm a wife, I'm a Christian. Those are the first things you introduced yourself at. You didn't say I'm a scholar from Northwestern. Introduce yourself as your personal, the things that your personal life, you put that on the forefront first. And
Mhm.
so that's important. And I want to then unpack that because you also mentioned and described your husband's background and it's
Yeah.
different from yours, right? And so I want to know what that was like. And I want to start there
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I think it's easy to kind of get into the whole like transnational back forth from you, and we'll get into that. But I want to
Yeah.
know what that cultural experience was like for you and him when you all met, when you
Yeah.
first you knew you were Nigerian and how you all started to navigate these things individually and then together when you all got married.
Yeah. I mean, we're one now, right? So like when I think of my identity, I gotta think, think of
I
that
love
part
it.
too.
Yeah.
but I guess going back, so yeah, so wife, Christian, daughter. So um everything, all of my experiences coming to the US, picking my career, all of that have really hinged on my faith. And it's been like, honestly, it is like scripture that has gotten me through a lot of these, like, very specific big life moments. So for instance, when I was wondering what career I wanted to go into, Matthew 25:35 really like stuck out to me in a way it never had. So it's the verse that says, when I was hungry, Jesus was talking with his
Right,
disciples.
right.
And he goes, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was naked, you clothed me. And it's like a bunch of these, like, random things that his disciples were like, when did we do any of that? And he
Right,
says, when you did that for the least of these, you did it for me. And
right.
that for me covered everything: public health, mass incarceration, food insecurity,
Mm,
poverty,
mhm.
forced migration, all of it. I was like, oh, okay, so I guess that's what I'm doing in my life. So if Jesus was here in the flesh as a Black woman living in the US, he'd probably be a public health professional. So it was a much longer
At
journey
the
to
very least, a
kind of
social
make
worker.
this transition, right? Like I was like, wow, Jesus really touched on all of that, but like the way that he usually does, very poetically and straight to the point. And that spoke to the creative in me. But my husband and I met when we were in undergrad. I was at Loyola, he was at Northwestern, and we both volunteered for the same ministry. It was a Christian ministry on campus. We were both student leaders through it. And he was just one of the bros. Like,
Mhm.
objectively speaking, he was cute, but like there was like none of that there, like you're just like ha kicking and all that. So we were friends for like 6 or 7 years. And then this is so dramatic. He called Chicago the land of his affliction. So he was like, as soon as he was done, like because he grew up in Dallas, like he was not about the
By
cold.
the coast, so he was out of
But
there,
literally the day after his graduation,
out of there, out of there, out of
he,
there.
he always says he remembers telling his mom, he's like, my wife ain't here. Like there's like nothing for me in Chicago. He left.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, like she thinks it's so funny. But so we reconnected. He traveled a bit for work. And at this time that we reconnected, he was living in North Carolina, Greensboro, North Carolina, Doc. Nobody lived there. It was him and the gas station. No, it was one of those towns or those areas where, like, you're on a long road trip and you
Yeah,
stop for us. And
but
yeah,
super
that's very,
rural.
yeah. So which is kind of very telling of the kind of person he is. He's
Right,
very, um, he's a social butterfly, but he loves his privacy and like does not mind living in the woods, apparently.
got you.
Which, like, he was like the only Black man, right? Living in the woods. Very interesting. But we reconnected at a friend's wedding, and it was one of those like out of sight, out of mind things for me. But I didn't realize at the time he had been praying about his wife and like who God wanted him to be with, because this is like a big life thing. If you're going to spend your life with somebody, like, you want to think about it, you want to pray about it. I'm giving the very like a short version because this is much longer, and his side is also longer. But we literally had not talked in years, and we didn't have each other on social media. I don't think he even had social media anymore at that time. So like really out of sight, out of mind. He
Mhm.
was coming into town for that wedding, and he's like preparing and stuff, and he's praying about the trip or whatever. And I pop in his mind out of nowhere, and he was like, At the time, he had a list. I didn't know this until we're engaged. He had a list of like 29 things. And I'm glad he didn't tell me to we're engaged, but it's like, Jessica sounds like she could be the person that like fits everything on the list.
Wow.
Um, and like his thing too is like, if you're missing one thing, that you ain't his wife, so anyway, he prayed. He was like, well, Lord, if Jessica's my wife, if it's your will that I pursue her till marriage, let me bump into her this weekend when I go to Chicago.
Mm,
He didn't know I was even friends with the people that he was coming to town to see the wedding. Um, I happened to be invited to that wedding too. Long story short, we're like sitting at the same table at the reception, and like we reconnect. And I'm like, you a man now. Um, and it was like, it's like, hey, you look different. I was like, did you grow your facial hair or something? He's like, no,
man.
girl, I look the same. But long story short, we reconnected, we start dating again, we start dating and eventually get married. But so he had always known I was Nigerian. Like, in fact, I think the first time we met, I think I asked him if he was Nigerian because to me he had very Nigerian features. He was like,
Mhm.
"No, I'm from the South. I'm from Dallas, born in Oklahoma." It's like,
Okay.
"Oh, sorry."
Right,
Um,
right.
but so he's always known, right? And my accent, I think, was thicker, and I code switch a lot. So he's like heard me do all of it. He's heard my professional white girl voice. He's heard my Nigerian accent, all of it. Um, so as far as navigating our identities, I think it wasn't something that we were necessarily thinking about, very forefront because we knew each other for so long.
Yeah.
Um, also just having lived here for so long, I was like used to having several African American friends. I was aware of differences within our cultures, but like also in love with our similarities. So, for instance, the way that we honor our parents,
Mhm.
and the way that we like want our parents to be a part of some of the more specific things in our lives without sharing too much with our parents, because it's not everything that they're trying to know.
Right, right.
So I met his parents. We started dating August of 2019. I met his parents uh November, and I remember thinking, wow, our moms are the same person. Like they're very similar. They're a little different, but they're very similar, and our dads are very similar. So like all of that just kind of eased me into the idea of like becoming a part of a family that was not Nigerian, because there's so many things that were very
Right.
similar to my upbringing. They're like both Christian, very similar values. Um, he came with me to Nigeria in March of 2021 because we got married May 2020. So he came with me in March to like get some like in-person time with my family.
Right.
And I think that was very different for him. Like he would say, man, I don't know if like African Americans can really come back to some parts of Nigeria and just easily reassimilate because everything is so different. Like there's just, I was
Right.
like, yeah, actually, that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Um, he enjoyed it. He really wants to go back. Like we're figuring out the next time we'll be able to make a trip,
Okay.
but he felt so loved. He felt, he is he's light skinned compared to me and my family. Like my family, we're all dark. My parents have this thing where they don't call him their son-in-law. To him, that's their son.
Mhm.
He's tall. He's over 6 feet. My parents are like 5'5". So my dad would be like, "That's my son." Introduce him as his son and not explain. And just
Right.
people are looking confused. Like when did
The color complexion of you.
like what like you were like
Yeah.
um. But
Bring
he really like
they say like you bring in an Oyibo person.
exactly. It was so my rule was like whenever we go out, just don't talk, please, because like the moment they hear your accent,
Oh, it's over for you.
your target. Yeah. So like we're not doing that. But I mean, it was a really great time. And then I have two younger sisters. They absolutely love him. He's the brother they never had. Um, yeah, so like it has really helped as far as culture and all that, that our families genuinely love each other, and there's like a genuine respect
Right.
even in those cultural differences. They're like united in the fact that they love the Lord and they love us, and and like we're one family now. If we have kids eventually, like that's all theirs. So yeah, that's kind of a long answer to your question.
I mean, but it's an insightful one, right? And it's an insightful one because I'm even as you're talking about it, I'm reflecting on mine. I'm also married to an African American woman. I have children with her, and
Yeah,
and that in its own right is interesting because of how my kids will also start to construct their identity as they get to my age and beyond.
yeah.
And so I'm thinking about that process. And did you have to it doesn't sound like you had to overcome any of those expectations or fight any stereotypes that were presumed about African Americans with your parents, right? Or did you still have to
Oh,
kind
good
of do some?
question. I don't think so. I think so I have a very core memory of being maybe like 15 or so. I had gone back home to Nigeria over the summer. I was in church, and this one lady who like had no business trying to ask very personal questions. She was
Mm,
like, "Oh, are you
mm,
dating yet?" Blah blah. I was like, not really. Sorry, I wasn't 15. I was already living in the US. So I was definitely older than 17 because I was 17 when I came here. Um, anyway, I'm back home and everything, and she's like, well, whatever you do, just don't bring back those Black Americans. You know how they are. I was like,
Exactly. Exactly.
I was thankful that a comment like that didn't come from my family, but I became very aware that there was a disconnect, and a lot of it is really just coming from media portrayals.
Absolutely.
So it was not this person was not speaking out of a lived experience or
Right.
anything. Yeah, and we know we have issues with that with media portrayals in the U.S., but thankfully I didn't have to work through any of that. My parents really just saw my husband for who he is, like a lovely man who genuinely loves me and loves and honors them. And he did a pretty good job of showing it very early on that he respected them, he honored them, and he wanted to learn about their culture and learn about their expectations of him.
Mhm.
But a big part of it too was the way I presented him.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
because my parents trust me and like
Right.
they trust the work that they've done. And so
Yeah.
for them it was like, oh, she's bringing someone at home, he's not an idiot.
Yeah.
Like he's like
Yeah.
she thinks about him. So it was multiple things that played into it, and thankfully because all those things were in place, I really didn't have to do any extra work
Yeah.
later.
You bring up something that I and your art the part that was interesting is that you see what you said in terms of like I they trusted you and they didn't see for me I kind of had to have that conversation not
Okay.
in full entirety with my folks. It was like it was kind of very similar where I just kind of had to I didn't have to say much, but I kind of also just hinted like if you have a problem with
Mhm.
the type of person I'm bringing home, then, or at least if you have that fear, then you don't trust what you did. Right.
Exactly.
And that was my rationale as well in terms of raising me, right? Like I'm not going, I spent this whole part of my life trying to make y'all proud and do all of this. How would
Hmm.
I now jeopardize that? Not to say that I'm put your family, in a high priority, but of course I want to make sure that my happiness in terms of finding the one that I want to be with for the rest of my life is priority. But
Yeah.
I'm like you said, I'm not gonna bring someone an idiot. You know what I mean? Like I'm not gonna bring anybody that's going to just embarrass all of us, right?
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
this thing will be planned and you have certain like your husband boxes and you're trying to make sure that there's certain things you want to check and that aligns to make sure that okay, this is someone that can be fitting not just with you on a day-to-day basis, but can fit your family, can understand and respect your culture, as open-minded, may not necessarily know, but wants to learn, right?
Hmm.
And then you all can be able to learn from what teach each other different things. And that was another thing that for me, I was never one to tell my wife like this is what you must do, right? Like after now that you're here and you're with us and you just are on the African side, you must now do this. Right?
Hmm.
It was
Hmm.
all
Right.
about I've also understood being here as long as I've been here that the African American culture has its values and its history and its richness and the impact that it has on the world is sometimes underappreciated and
Hmm.
in its own right. We need
Yeah.
to learn more about that and how they've been able to devise something that has done so much for so many people and whether and that's not just black people all across the world. And so for me though, I did have those conversations with my parents where they're like, oh, don't go and bring home African Americans. And there's another derogatory word they use. I don't want to use it today, but
Yeah.
so that don't go and bring home this person, don't go and bring home African Americans, all these stereotypes. And for
Hmm.
having parents and people who raised me that like have been here, these stereotypical notions I found were very I just didn't understand the distaste. And because my experiences with African Americans were always normal, they were always expected. This is what, you take the but I also understood that I made a concerted effort to learn the history. I made a concerted effort to immerse myself in understanding Black and African American history in the US. So I understood and could relate and it was for you just like I can code switch and I was able to kind of
Hmm.
blend in different environments. But when it came to like my partner, my wife, I kind of felt like in before we get to the stage of marriage, I needed to kind of advocate, not necessarily
Yeah.
like not hard, but I had to present her well, right? Just like you did with yours. Like the way I presented her was kind of essentially like, oh, she's not like the others, which in its own right was kind of like, but we gotta pick your battles, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like,
Right.
you
Right.
pick your battles in this situation where it's like, oh, you're not like the others. And it's like, wait a minute, what do you mean by that? But like, so but she also got to go to Nigeria in 2017, and
Okay.
she got that
What
experience.
part?
Huh?
What
We were in
part?
Abuja. We went to Abuja first.
Okay.
The
Okay.
second time we came back, we went to the village in Imo State.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was crazy. It was crazy, but it was an experience for her. And I think the first time she was like, "Man, this is nice. All black people, very similar. You're welcome. You're home. You're our daughter. Blah blah blah." She gets
Mhm.
that experience, But then the thing, the second time was like, "Okay, I'm here. It's cool, but man, like structurally, this environment is kind of like where's
Yeah.
the light? Like where's the light? Where's this? Where's that? Like I don't know if I can
Where
do
is
this for an
the
extended period of time." Right? Like, and I couldn't
Yeah.
blame her. She's like, by the time we
Yeah.
went to, but for in all fairness, I also understood that like I didn't and not necessarily unintentionally, but like I didn't give ourselves the opportunity to also see the finer things that Nigeria particularly has to offer. We didn't get that experience. We kind of came in on business, right? It was like
Mhm.
we came in, we want to do family things, familiar, and get that stuff out the way. So we didn't come
Mhm.
for enjoyment, and that's something that I
Mhm.
still, as we continue to move on in this married life, is something that I still feel that I owe her and
Mhm.
myself, but I owe us, I guess I'll say, is that
Mhm.
I want us to be able to enjoy enjoyment. And when I say enjoyment, that's Nigerian enjoyment, African enjoyment. Like
Yeah.
we haven't
Yeah.
gotten that taste of it for real yet. And that's
Mhm.
what I think is on my bucket list of things
Nice.
for us to do, because we just never had that opportunity. I think, so but in just taking everything that you said into consideration as far as the experiences, we've had to have Wanda and I've had to have, conversations just about just everything that has to do with the black and African American, the interracial tension between African immigrants or black immigrants and
Mhm.
African Americans, or the ADOS community, whatever they want to call it. But
Mhm.
I I've always had to just make sure we get that straight. And it's not something that we don't debate about or anything, but it's just something that we always get to share perspective on. Like, yo, I see it this way, and I never saw it like this, or you all do this way, and we do it.
Mhm.
We find similarities and differences in terms of like one interesting thing, right? Just to share, and for those who listen, you may have heard this before in other seasons, but just the way we describe cousins, right? Like for me, anyone that like is in my generation, whether you're my cousin, my mom's cousin's son, or you're like, you're my cousin,
Yeah,
right? We don't
right.
do like you're my first cousin. We don't do second cousin, third. Like it's not something
Mhm.
that I grew up really like understanding that particular terminology. It wasn't until I got here where I'm like, oh, what is a first cousin? What's a second cousin? Like in my
Right.
mind, it's kind of ignorant. Like it's like first cousin, that's the person you see first. That's like the person like you.
Right.
Is it a cousin that you see first? That's your first
That's
cousin.
a
Like,
fair
that's
question.
your number
Like,
one cousin.
are
Like,
you
I'm
closer to
confused.
it? Yeah, that's a fair question.
So I didn't know. So that's but those are the things, the cultural, like the interactions, those are the type of
Yeah,
conversations that we have sometimes in our personal time, is just trying to figure out because for our kids, how do we describe this? Because to me, the way I look at it is my cousin, whether I don't care what it's first, second, but my cousin's kid is your cousin. That's
right,
it. Right.
right,
But for her, she might be like, my cousin's kid is your second or third cousin,
right.
it's removed or something. So
Mental gymnastics. That's what it is, and sometimes we're just not trying to do all that. We just
so it's just those are the things that I just be like, these are conversations, the different types of conversations
Mhm.
that we have among ourselves. And I don't know how as you all continue to plan your lives together, you
Yeah.
all have those type of like similar type of vibes or no?
Well, we don't have kids yet, so there's some
Yeah.
things that we're like, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But we're
Right.
also very similar in, even in the way that we see family, like it's, the cousin thing. I think because I am just a little more type A than my husband,
Hmm.
while we will say cousin, in my mind, I'm like, well, technically,
Okay.
maybe like technically that's like second cousin, but like we're still gonna say cousin because I'm like, what's your cousin? Like, sir, you're 29. Why's your cousin 60?
Right,
Um,
right.
like you're doing the like math in my head. But yeah, we I think the part that we think about more and talk about more a little bit are the traits that we have, very cultural traits that come from our parents that um we don't necessarily want to take on, but are like norms
Mhm.
based on culture with our parents. So for instance, this is not like I don't want to say this is a generalized Nigerian thing. It's just I grew up surrounded by a lot of women who did this, where your identity as a wife and as a mother is the value that you bring in when you can cook and you can clean and you
Mhm.
might work a job, but you'll do all of those things and you're the primary nurturer and all of that.
Mhm.
That I had a full identity crisis when I got married and I
Mm.
realized my husband loved to cook and he loved to clean. I was like, what am I doing here? Literally,
Mm. Wow.
like, what value am I adding here? And it
Yeah.
was this, like, this shift I had to make in realizing, oh, it was toxic that I was taught that, like, I have to get all the degrees, so I have to do all the work and just be good at all those things,
Mhm.
smile and look good, stay fit while all that is happening.
Wow.
Um, and like kind of work through like, oh, that was a cultural thing that I took from home. I internalized it. The educated person in me is like, take care of your mental health. I'll be the first to tell somebody like, find a
Right.
partner that that would like do life with you and walk with you, your partner, all of that.
Yeah.
But I came in with this ingrained, like, I guess a cultured mindset that like I'm a wife, so I'm going to do this and do this and do this, and I'm
Yeah.
still going to be successful by doing my dissertation and bringing in money.
Mhm.
And it was like it's still slowly being unpacked, but like it was a full on identity crisis
Yeah.
when we got married. And again, I'm not complaining at all. This is an absolute blessing
Yeah.
that my hands can throw down. Like there's things that I refuse to learn how to cook because I'm like, he does it so well, I'm going to butcher it, and vice versa. Like some things that it's just going to be me that cooks it because I cook it better. So we're not, weaponizing incompetence, but
All right.
but we're like, learning each other and learning what we want our family to look like and what we want our kids to see that would be different from what their grandparents, what was normal for their grandparents, especially on my side.
Yeah. So do y'all eat African food?
We do. So there are some foods because Nigerian food is they're so diverse. Like I'm Hausa, so I grew up in the north. But
Right.
so like think we eat, of course we eat things like jollof and stuff like that. But then there are certain very specific soups that I'm like, you know what? We're going to a restaurant to do that one because I don't even know where to start
Where to
finding the
find the
ingredients
ingredient.
in Chicago.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, but thankfully he's half Jamaican, so we be eating
Okay.
oxtail and jerk chicken and all that too. Like we enjoy the foods from everywhere.
Oh, wait, so being half Jamaican, that makes it
Mhm.
even more interesting.
I know, right?
Has he even been
Yeah.
to Jamaica?
No, that's a hope we have. We'd really like to go soon. But yeah, on his dad's side, so his dad lived in different countries. He lived in, I think he was born in Jamaica. I can't remember geographically what that math is because his dad has siblings that were also born in different places. But at some point lived in the UK and then eventually came to the US.
Yeah.
So he is a very cultured man
Yeah,
who
yeah, yeah.
married like a beautiful, brilliant Black African American woman
Yeah.
from the South, and so as they're raising their kids grew up to be cultured as well, but like still fall into their ebonics as naturally and as beautifully, but
Yeah.
also can be very professional in his way.
Yeah. I love
So
it.
yeah, I know, right? They definitely they have a pretty great they have a very well-rounded system in that side of the family.
Yeah, I mean the richness in culture, and even the transnational ties that are evident or not yet, but that is also something that I'm excited for you all to, like unpack and continue to explore. Right, being able to now see how the Jamaican roots also, or the Caribbean, part of that family ties into the continental part of your life
Yeah.
and all those things and how they impact. But all right. No, I mean, I think we've definitely talked a lot about your family, and I appreciate you sharing. So let's get into your interest though, because for the sake of time, I do want to touch on just you do a lot of really amazing work, and I think your dissertation and everything, and what we've talked about offline, you've shown a strong passion for something that I think a lot of our listeners need to be more aware of, in terms of like just the gender-based, especially growing up in the North. You mentioned being Hausa. That's another thing that I have to say. I think
Mm.
you might be the only Hausa person I've actually interviewed. So this is
I'm not
exclusive.
surprised. A lot of us end up going to the UK for some reason. I don't know
Exactly. Nobody
what that.
comes to US like that. So
Yeah.
it's very rare for me to like see a Hausa person, and because usually like Igbo or Yoruba people might sometimes. I've even interviewed an Ibibio person, but never really Hausa.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so this is an honor, right? And so like for your experience growing up Northwest, predominantly Muslim, and to be a Christian, but in a
Mhm,
space that's predominantly Muslim, and
mhm,
then to also experience the things that are happening there,
mhm,
which has been, the genital mutilation that
mhm.
happens there. I want you to just share with us a little bit more about that part and what drew you to that
Yeah.
interest and what you're doing with that now.
Absolutely. So I grew up the first 8, 9 years of my life were in Kano State, which is, if you're familiar with Nigerian geography, it is north proper. I was born in Borno State, which is even more north of Kano, if that's possible. And my dad is from Plateau State, a little closer to the middle belt. My family now lives in Abuja, but a lot of my like life experience has been in the north. So a lot of my friends growing up were Muslim. We spoke Hausa. So like Muslims honestly have a special place in my heart. I have like, I
Mm.
just kind of grew a love and respect for the way that they genuinely like let life and like religion really go hand in hand. There's really no separating it. Of
Yeah.
course, with every organized religious system, you have your radicals.
Yep.
So we did have to run away from a couple of fires here and there, some jihad,
Mm.
activities popping off in different places. But so that was actually a little connected into how got into public health without knowing that. So when I was in Kano, I was about 8 or so. I had a friend who started to talk about this old man that was coming to their house to visit more often. And around that time, she had just started her period. And we're talking about the playground, which is like fourth primary fourth, like fourth grade. We're in
Yeah.
different classes, like classrooms, but during our break time,
Like
we'd meet
recess.
at the swings, exactly, recess. And so recess for us was really not a time to like take turns on the swing. We were like having very deep philosophical conversations
Wow.
about the fact that she was about to become a bride. Um, Obviously, we're 8 and 9. We're not, the weight of it as adults, we're like, whoa. But like as a kid, I was like, man, that's messed up. We can't let that happen.
Yeah.
So I had this whole plan. I was like, you're going to escape. You're going to come live with my parents. Where like my parents have 3 daughters. You'll fit right in and
Mhm.
stuff. And it's like a whole strategic plan. I'm like, heck yeah, because we can't let you marry that old man. Ew.
Right, right, yeah.
He's your dad's age. So I remember going home and explaining the whole plan to my mom, and my mom and her the best way she could, she was like, "Absolutely not, we're not doing that." I was like, "What do you mean?" I'm immediately thinking, "Wow, is my mom a horrible person?" Um,
Right.
and she explained to me, she was like, "Well," and I'm obviously gonna paraphrase because it's so long ago. What she was essentially trying to communicate was because of the lifestyle that they have, religion, culture, all of it, she belongs to her family, and so they have the right to decide if she's going to marry this man. And eventually, if she does, which inevitably she was going to, he'll pay a bride price or whatever. Like they believe they're setting her up well for success, but that's just unfortunately what's going to happen. Now, your father and I would not do that with the three of you because we don't believe in that. But then I started to ask questions like, okay, are her parents educated? What area do they live in? What religion are they a part of? All of that.
Mm.
Now, I think questions that I now realize in adulthood, those are the social determinants of health.
Right.
But then I guess from an early age, started to wonder what are the things around us that will determine the health of a certain people. So starting to kind of dive into what it meant to be a child bride and everything that happened biologically, all the
Mm.
ways that your body is broken really because you're not ready to experience the things that your body was made for adults. School space. So I wanted to go to really one of the best medical schools there in the north, up north in the state I was born, Borno State. But around that time, Boko Haram really started to pop off. Let me just put it like that. And my
Yeah.
parents were like, absolutely not. Like, we're
Mhm.
sending you abroad. Go online, find a school.
Yeah.
So long story short, it was really a supernatural process between starting to look for schools to eventually finding Loyola in Chicago, but like it literally involved dreams and visions. Like I did not know Loyola was a school in the
Wow.
US. Like it was like a vision that it didn't even, it was like literally a big brown door with the blue tag that
What?
does not exist anywhere. It wasn't like it wasn't until years later when I was like in my, I think my freshman or sophomore year at Loyola, sitting at my desk, that picture came back, and I called my mom. I was like, "What was that?" This is honestly just a paraphrase, like a short version of it, because we don't have a lot of time. But my mom was like, "That door doesn't exist anywhere," and it turned out it was just a vision that the Lord was giving me of the door that He was going to open for me.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so I end up at Loyola. I'm in some global health class or something like that, and the assignment was to write on some global health issue that you're interested in. You have to pick a different country, and of course I'm like, oh, write about something in Nigeria. And I came across this topic that was talking about female genital mutilation in African countries, and I remember feeling so livid because I was like, this is just another Western paper trying to find something wrong with an African country.
Right.
I am, just so irritated. And so I'm like going into this rabbit hole to try to disprove it. And then I find scholarly articles written by scholars in the universities in the state I grew up in.
Mhm.
One of them specifically was Bayero University. I think one of my uncles went there. And I was like, oh, wait, these people are writing about female genital cutting it like in Nigeria. I was like, but as someone who grew up there who had dived into women's health and all of that, I was like, how did I miss this? Like I come from a family of daughters. How did I miss this?
Mhm.
Um, and it was like really like a combination of like shock and like I was like, I'm ashamed of myself. I'm not a real Nigerian. Blah, 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 what? Um, and just in diving into it more, and this kind of became my next 10 years of like diving into FGM and what it meant. I realized Nigeria actually has a much smaller prevalence than other parts of the world. So like the BBC will report it's about 29% prevalence, but other places report 40%, which is a really wide range. But when you have underreporting and like shame behind a practice, of course,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
statistics will look
key.
different. But I found that places like Somalia and Djibouti had a 97 and 98% prevalence, which is significantly high. It kind of made me feel better, like, okay, maybe there's a reason I didn't know.
Yeah.
As far as Nigeria, it wasn't just happening in the north, it was happening in the west, in the east, among Christians, among Muslims, among traditionalists. It was like there's no template as to what the typical
Yeah.
survivor of genital cutting would look like.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. But so let me just backtrack a little bit on what it actually is. What
Right.
so I'll just say FGM, it's female genital mutilation, is kind of a mouthful. Um, it's in many parts of the world a traditional rite of passage. That basically allows you go from being a child to a woman.
Mm.
There are four types, and different types are practiced in different parts of the world. But type one is called a clitoridectomy. That's where the clitoris is cut off or it's shaved. Type two is called an excision, and that's where you're cutting off the clitoris and the labia minora, so a little bit of the flesh on the inside. Type three is an infibulation. So you're doing all of that, some combination of type one and two, and you're sewing up the vulva completely to completely cover the urethra and
Yeah.
leave a straw size opening for the vaginal canal. So imagine what that means for the field of urology, right? Where
Yeah.
urine, yeah, it's like basically impossible to keep your genital area clean. Urine sprays instead of flows. There are multiple people who report complications with their bladder and kidney and all of that. Type four is essentially
This is
everything.
type 4.
There's a type four.
Oh
Um,
my.
it's
Sorry.
it's
I mean,
like
I know you mentioned it earlier. I'm processing it,
you're
and you just
processing it.
realized
I
like,
know.
damn, wait, there's more. I'm sorry.
I
Would you?
know. It is. This is the last
Wow.
type, but type four is the least common type, and it ranges from everything from like cauterizing the area to stabbing to piercing. It's really whatever doesn't really fit in types one, two, three. We just kind of classify under type four.
I mean,
I know.
I can only imagine. And now I want to, and this is a very ignorant question,
Oh,
uh,
go ahead.
but is this something that some of the women choose to do?
Great question. So
Participate
yes,
to
in
be part
some
of for the
cases,
sake of the
some people.
culture?
In some cases, some people choose to. So
Hmm,
when you grow up knowing that something is a cultural rite of passage, it is like your right into womanhood. Your mother, your grandmother, your aunties, the people of authority that you respect in your life have
hmm,
experienced this and they've encouraged it. There's a kind of hypnotizing you can carry yourself through.
hmm,
So in some traditions, the girl is cut like 8 days after she's born or when she's a little older. The first couple of survivors I talked to were 7 years old when they were cut. Some people they kind of wait till your period has started, so it's a whole experience of starting your womanhood. But some people wait till they're about to get married because in some contexts in some cultures, the spouses, the men have been kind of trained to prefer that in their wives, and so to prepare her for marriage, she experiences headache. So yeah, some people choose it, which is why in some spaces you'll hear advocates or anti-FGM advocates calling it FGC, female genital cutting, because
hmm.
there are people who are dealing with multiple health consequences, but they believe that that rite of passage was appropriate. So it's really insulting, or
It
it could
is
come off as
mutilation.
insulting. Exactly. So you'll hear people say FGC and FGM. What I don't let people say is female circumcision.
Exactly. That's why I
Yeah,
didn't say that.
thank you.
Yeah.
I would have caught it right away if you said it
I
because
hate that terminology.
they're completely different. And not everyone is about male circumcision anyway,
Right.
but male circumcision, you're just cutting off the foreskin. And there's actually data in some parts of the, especially coming from like South Africa, where HIV is highly prevalent. There is like a 60% less chance of contracting HIV if you're circumcised, like male, as
Exactly.
opposed to uncircumcised,
Yeah.
right? So there's data that shows there are actually health benefits. With FGM, not only is it extremely violent, there's no
Reverse.
documentation of health benefits.
It might most likely be harmful. I
Absolutely.
mean, we talk about like because we can argue that I mean not argue, but we can discuss the idea when it comes to male circumcision that there are like you said positive benefits in terms of just like hygiene and all those other things, right? You can like, what it can do in terms of cleaning that area of your body, but
Yeah.
for what you just described about how that process goes with the FGC, um,
Mhm.
it does not sound like there are many things, especially if you're closing it up and you're creating more opportunities for you're putting yourself more at risk for infections and different
Absolutely.
types of
Yeah. And
deaths.
you can find multiple peer-reviewed articles that document some of the side effects. So everything from excessive bleeding to sepsis and shock. Some people have died from excessive hemorrhage. There have been reports of PTSD and anxiety and vaginismus. So for I guess anyone listening who hasn't heard that term before, vaginismus is the involuntary contracting of the vaginal canal that can make sex very painful. And a lot of times people don't a lot of times it's connected to trauma, and so some women who have experienced FGM experience vaginismus as a result, especially when they can remember their
Mhm.
experience of FGM.
Yeah. I mean, and so what I'm thinking about now is just the idea of in the Western world here in the US, right? And that's something, of course, that is when you think about FGC, is not something that's, of course, uh embraced, right? Most likely frowned
Not
upon.
anymore. It was at some point. I can tell you about that,
Oh,
but
okay. And so I mean, I don't want to take too much more of your time. I'm sure we could be able to unpack this and do a part two. But I think the idea now I'm thinking about is like, okay, so what about those people who had that experience and then immigrated here to the US? The transnationals who are
hmm
I'm not gonna say victims, but who experienced
hmm
FGC,
yeah,
and what their experiences are like now, because you're in a
yeah,
country here where I mean most places, and I think there's some political conversation and divide in terms of sex education, knowing your body, especially when it comes to women, right? But I think even the idea of proposing sex for pleasure, right, is for women and all those things. And when you experience something like that, what does that do to the mind
Yeah.
people who really didn't get that experience, maybe looking for it, were thought that were taught that sex was just meant to be for babies, but now you understand that there are different ways in which a woman can explore her body, and you might
Yeah.
be handcuffed because
Yeah.
of that.
So there, sorry if that you just heard that. Hopefully you didn't. My email thing went off.
No, you're
Um,
good.
so there are kind of two things that you were talking about there that I'll address separately. So there are a lot of people who end up immigrating from parts of the world where it was celebrated, it was legal, all of that, and they come here because it has not because it's been illegal in the U.S. since '96, which side note was yesterday. We were alive in '96. It's
Wow.
been illegal in the US since '96. It's not part of discussion in medical spaces, right? So unless you go into the continuing education part, but medical students are not hearing about this. So you have people who start their practice and are meeting these, global travelers who have experienced this and are unprepared. I was listening to a story of a survivor a few months ago who, when she first immigrated to the US, I believe she had just gotten pregnant. It was a prenatal visit or it was a physical, one or the other. She's at the doctor's office anyway. There's about to be an examination, and the doctor, proceeds to look her up and has a very physical,
Okay.
visceral reaction because they weren't prepared for that.
Yeah.
And guess who just was not going to go to a doctor ever again after that? And with communities like that are very tight knit, you have word of mouth. So
Mhm.
as a woman who has experienced something so niche and so specific and so damaging, when you have a great experience with your doctor, you're going to tell the other women in your community. When you have a
Yeah.
terrible experience with your doctor, you will tell the other women in your
The
community.
community. Yeah.
Right. So where I'm taking a little break from this because it has been a really long time, but where I started to do some work was trying to educate medical professionals on the implications of FGM for their field. So like right now, you'll mostly find like nurses and a few gynecologists here and there that have heard of it, but there are implications for the fields of urology and surgery and pediatrics and emergency medicine and so on and so forth. So um, there's a lot of work to be done in helping medical professionals get ready for potentially meeting this because we have globalization going on. People are immigrating. And there was something else you said I wanted to address. Oh, yeah. So bodily autonomy and exploring one's body and all of that. That is definitely kind of still ongoing. So it's been a while since I've done some work with SEO, but a few months ago, I wrote a paper for them on intersectionality, and they're specifically an anti-FGM group. They're fantastic. They're relatively small, but their impact is huge. It's powerful. They originated from the Bora community, Dawidi Bora, which is an Indian community, but here in the US. And they've been addressing the intersectionality of FGM and other topics, including bodily autonomy.
Mhm.
And so basically, like helping people tell their stories so that it's normalized, so that if you are a survivor who has kind of been living in shame, you can hear that somebody else has been struggling with her sexuality and like what that means in the dating world and all of that when she has no sexual sensation or when she's terrified, even if she does, and what that could mean with her religious, a religious bent, right? Because in a lot of situations where people experience FGM, it was because it was ordered by a religious leader. So, what does that mean for experiencing your bodily autonomy while subscribing to this religion, while working through the experience of violation?
Right. Right.
So is unfortunately not a one-track conversation. You will
Mhm.
always meet people who would do it again, who believe that that was a rite of passage, but still want to
Right.
deal with the fallout that has come out of that.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very you can see it. It's a very complex
It's very
topic.
complex and even to some degree a convoluted one, right? Because
Yeah,
it's I mean, that in addition to all the controversial ones that we hear about in the states here, this isn't something that, like I said, historically, I'm sure you have information on this, but this isn't something that's often talked about.
Mhm.
And it's not something that I know, and I'm not necessarily trying to. I guess I could unpack it. Let's just do it, whatever. But like, but like, it's not something that I hear happen to white women, right? Like, it's just not
Yeah.
something. It doesn't happen with white women, and not to say that
Mhm.
it hasn't before, but it's just not something that, at least in recent times, that
Yeah.
it usually predominantly happens in black and browns, maybe mostly
Well,
black and Asian.
you would
Uh,
be surprised. So I
really?
was okay, yeah, I know we're running out of time. Let me
Yeah,
just
yeah.
quickly give you this one. So I was talking with a psychiatrist, I think it was sometime early last year. And she's white and she's been practicing and she really has a heart for FGM survivors. She's really the only psychiatrist I know specifically that has like walked with multiple women from different parts of the world who have experienced this. She started an organization called Forma specifically for that.
Mhm,
So we're talking about it. I'm like, oh, finally, another academic, in this space, because she was
mhm.
in Chicago as well. And she goes, let me tell you something. I'm starting to encounter white women who have experienced FGM, but
Wow.
they survive, they escape from cults. So their experience is different in the sense that they don't have community in a way that a lot of the other transnational survivors in the US now do,
Mhm,
where it was your mom's experience, your sister's
mhm.
experience, and your aunt, but you're also tight knit and you're walking through what this means together. As a
Yeah.
cult survivor, not
Mm,
only have you left everything you know and left your beliefs and all of that, you're ostracized.
yes.
Nobody wants anything to do with you. And like there's a gag order on you basically where you can barely talk about your
Everything
experience
about
without
them. Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So there are white women who have experienced this. They are very few.
That's a good one.
But
I don't even, and that's my ignorance in terms of, I always, that's an overlooked part,
mhm,
right? Unless I'm watching a documentary on
mhm.
who or something, that's not something that essentially comes to my mind. And
Yeah.
that's just my bias.
And I mean, one of the ways that, I guess, an indicator of just how serious this is even though I know of a few of them, I don't know their real names.
Hmm.
Because that's intentional with the ones who have been brave enough to come out and like we've had to protect their identities.
Yeah.
But for a lot of the other women who have experienced it, who come from Nigeria or India or some other parts of Asia, I know their real names, first
Yeah.
name, last name. I know where they work.
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah.
Like it's just publicly available information.
Yeah.
They're sharing their stories. It's not to make it any. It's not that it's been any easier for them, but that identity piece looks a little different
Yeah.
when when you've run away from a cult.
Yeah, yeah, and so just kind of going back to that, my point in terms of how it's intertwined with culture, and
Mhm.
even the interesting aspect of what you're doing with transnationalism is just that the cultural piece, the retention of culture, and what that does for someone when you travel with your culture, that remains who you are, and that
Mhm.
influences your choices. So whether you're here, you're back there, how you respond to certain things. I find it very fascinating how something, a practice like FGC is, how that would be retained, or how it be perceived with
Mhm.
migration patterns, right? And so
Yeah.
that's something that I hope, to talk more about you in the future. But because we're pressed for time, I won't get into that. But I do want to just wrap up this by having you answer this one question. With this work, what do you want the overall greatest impact? What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want it to, what do you want this to do for the community you care for?
It's a good question. So I want I want it to be said, whether it's by just one random doctor somewhere, that they heard about this because they heard me talking about it, or they heard me at some conference or whatever. And so they dove deeper into it. And because of that, several women that have come through their practice have had a healthy experience. They've had risky health behavior go down. They've had a doctor who understood them and walked with them, because I think at the level that I'm working at, I'm not going to be the face of it, and I'm really not trying to be. I
Mm,
just want to be the person that gets to drop that information and just keep moving, kind of drop as many seeds as possible along the way.
mm,
So it really, at the end of the day, I want to know that I've done everything I could to inform and inform and inform, and whatever ripple effect that is going to have, hopefully in heaven one day I'll know. Like one day it'll be like some lady that's like, you don't even know, girl, but like my
mm.
daughter escaped FGM because of you, because you randomly told the doctor. So I'm very very content with being in the back.
Yeah.
Well, because they're incredible people, way, way smarter than I am, more influential than I am, that are doing a lot of really great work on the ground. But just getting to be on this end to prepare the doctors for when those influential people have sent the women this way, I enjoy being a part of that.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. Oh my God, Dr. Jessica Puri. Thank you so much for jumping on the show, sis. I wish we had more time to talk. And maybe another time in the future we can
I
have
do.
you jump
Yeah,
on and talk more again. This was fun. Definitely want to talk a little bit more about your personal upbringing and your cultural experiences. We didn't get to talk too much about that, and
yeah.
we'll further for the other one. But
Because there are a lot of Jessica Breeze. I got to stand out somehow.
all right, sis. Well, thank you so much for jumping on the show, and looking forward to having you on again sometime in the future. But as you know, we're here to support whatever we can do to make sure that your work continues to spread and people can feel that impact that you're looking for in the long run. We are here to kind of make sure that that happens. So thank you again for jumping on the show.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.